The federal government thinks if you put the Border Patrol station 60 miles north, Jose is going to be stupid enough to go through there and then you'll catch him. And that's not true. The Border Patrol station is making these people walk in that deep sand with very little water.
Sheriff's office, let me help you.
I'm trying to have some information regarding a family member who is missing.
There's been a lot of missing people.
We realized there was a big problem along the border, and I don't think anybody realized just how big it was. Thousands of people have died.
An illegal alien crosser is an illegal alien crosser. It's black and white, it's not gray. We're in a war zone here.
This is the South Texas Human Rights Center.
It's like you just walk off the earth. It's as if you never existed.
Welcome. I'm sure you really were inspired by that film. It's very timely, it's very important, but it's also very beautifully shot. It just looks really beautiful while we're looking at things that are very distressing and really, distressing. With us tonight, it's almost tonight, late this afternoon, we have the filmmakers. Jeffrey, do you want to, let me start with you. Do you want to talk about like how you started this project? What got you into doing this?
I actually heard about this phenomenon of people going missing in the American desert from my sister-in-law, who is from Mexico. And I remember being shocked at the scale of this, and then I didn't understand that was happening. And then I happened to hear a radio story a few weeks later about a forensic scientist at Baylor University who was doing the work that you see Kate Spradley doing in the film. Anyway, I was really moved by the story. And so I had met Lisa in the East Coast. We were both teaching at the same college, and she was now living near the border. And so I sent her the story. And I think you had the same reaction to it that I did, pretty much.
Yeah.
So Lisa, how did you, what made you decide that you wanted to do this? And when you decided to do this, how did the two of you come to a sense of how you would work together and define your roles?
Well, I think what we decided was that we would go to Texas and meet with Dr. Baker and find out more, just in a research, basically, sort of way, like a first filming trip. And so we did that. And basically, as Jeff mentioned, I live 70 miles north of the border. I live in Tucson, Arizona, where immigration issues are front and center. I teach at the University of Arizona. Some of my students are DACA recipients. It's part of living by the border here to hear stories of immigration from my students, their parents, who came here with papers, without papers, so this was something obviously on my mind. So when he sent me the story, I thought it was worth pursuing. So we went to Texas and we met with Dr. Baker, and she took us down to Brooks County. And we knew very little about any of this, what was happening in Brooks County before we arrived. And we drove down with Lori in separate cars. And we got there, and Jeff and I basically were like, okay, where's the border? And we were told, well, the border is 70 miles away. We're nowhere near the border. And this was the first of many things that we learned about what was happening in Brooks County that were very surprising and confusing. And each trip we took after that, we went to Brooks County about 15 times over 5 years. learned how complicated the situation was, and eventually met our protagonists and made the connections and the relationships that we needed to tell a meaningful story.
So
But
how did you meet all those folks?
Well, Dr. Baker introduced us to the sheriff of Brooks County on that first trip,
Mm-hmm.
which is key to filming in a small town like that, because you really do have to have the support of the person in charge. So we have a very good relationship with the sheriff of Brooks County. And she introduced us to Eddie Canales, who is the main protagonist in the film, on that trip. And so that Lori was sort of the person that facilitated, and she told us about Kate's work. Kate was the sort of person who was doing most of the forensic work in Brooks County. So eventually we met her on a subsequent trip.
The Romans who were searching for Omero, their brother and brother-in-law Omero, they actually found us online. We had just named the film tentatively, and we created this little website, and she was searching for missing in Brooks County for those words, and our site came up, and we passed her along to Eddie Canales, but then we contacted her and asked if she would be if they would be interested in sharing their story, and bravely they said yes.
All right, I just want to point out, let me just say this, because if any of you are film students or young filmmakers, that is a reason for you to have a website with the name and issue of your film, because people will come to you if you are out there in the world. So like just a small Facebook page is not enough. Make an actual
And
website.
can I play devil's advocate? Because after we created the site, I'm not going to go into detail here, but after we created the site, when we thought this was a good thing to do for funding and to tell people what the project was about in a very straightforward way, to create a website. But when you're making a documentary, you don't necessarily want the whole world to know your point of view, right? So, but that's what you're doing, kind of, or that's what we did on our website. I think you could really tell certain things about the film from the website. And, we got into a little bit of trouble from that. But it was all worth it, because we met the Romans with that website, and we had been filming with other families. I mean, it's, in terms of, research, we had been spending time with other families trying to find the right stories to tell in the film. And we were about 2 years into filming, I think, when we met the Romans. So, we had already been spending time with other families, and it was like, oh no, not another family. But they were the right family to tell their story for a number of reasons.
So how did you find funding for this? I mean, this is not a short-term project. This took a while. And particularly if you're traveling a lot, I mean, just in terms of getting down there, getting a crew and sort of shooting it, that takes money. What was that process like, and who came in to help?
Well, fundraising is really fun. That's what the process was like. We love fundraising.
Lisa, can you be my friend?
I'm joking. It's the worst part of the whole process.
Everybody goes into documentary filmmaking because they want to make a killing and really get rich. We barely covered our expenses, the ones you mentioned, the hard costs that you just can't get around.
For production.
For production. Basically, we had some academic funders, and some of them came from Arizona, that just kept us shooting. And then in the end, once the film was put together, we were very fortunate. We became a co-production with ITVS. For those who don't know, that's basically PBS. They liked the film and they came in. And so the film is actually going to have its broadcast premiere on Independent Lens next year.
But we also had an executive producer, Abby Disney, at Fork Films, and they gave us some money when they came on board. But when they saw our rough cut is when they really, they were really excited about the film at that point and helped us out with some finishing funds as well. So
Abby Disney and Fork Films were like our guardian angel through the whole process.
And really, I mean, the phone calls of, with our consulting producer about every step along along the way was just amazing support, which, you know, we are filmmakers, we are not business people. We don't know every aspect of the film business. And so it's so crucial to have consulting producers. We have another consulting producer, Diane Kwan, who's the producer of Minding the Gap, who has been so
that's a great film. Yeah.
key to all of our questions right now about distribution and before. And so that's been wonderful.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk briefly about post, and obviously with people in different cities, moving along in post-production is got to have been a challenge.
I think it was stressful. One, because we were not paying our editor, and two, because he's my husband. And
I was about to say, can I find the number of the editor I can get for nothing?
Yeah, well, he's wonderful and we worked really well together and we're very in sync. It's just that I was reminded at every step that we were not paying him until we actually got ITVS funding. So that was stressful. Jeff and I are used to work.
Well, he was also a producer, so, you know.
Yeah, it was his fault that we didn't have the money to pay him. There was one point where Jeff was in Connecticut at home. Yeah. I was in Toronto on a fellowship, and Jacob was in Tucson editing. But, you know, the editor needs to be left alone for a while. And so working like this, he was left alone at times, and then we would watch cuts and give feedback. And then, you know, a couple times Jeff came out to Arizona and we all worked together, which was like, I think amazing, the times that we did that. I wish we could have done it more, but we couldn't. And we just didn't have the funds to kind of do it in a way that would have been ideal. But there was
a lot of drop boxing back and forth and stuff like that. But, you know, now everybody's working digitally.
But, you know, Jeff and I had been working together shooting for 5 years. We got to know each other really well. Texas is, as you know, as the audience knows, is a huge state. And we'd have these car rides where we'd be going from like South Texas to Houston to Austin to work. And so I think we would talk about the film a lot in the car. And we really were in sync every step of the way about what we were trying to do and how we wanted to do it. And I think that also carried over into the editing. And we both trusted the editor, Jacob, to do his work. And we knew we were the directors, so we could give feedback. And we knew the material like the back of our hands. Jeff and I did, because we shot it. And then Jacob came in and put his sort of just his interpretation of the footage. And it was wonderful to have that.
So that's sort of a thing where if you have a long drive on a production, you can get in sync. And I know people who sort of purposely go a little further on a narrative film. You spend time in the car with your actor and it's sort of, you know, moves nicely, you know, it kind of is a really good thing.
You bring up something important, because when we went to Texas to film, we would go for 2 weeks, but you know, it was patchy. So every time we would see our protagonists again, we would have to reestablish the relationships, sort of. So it wasn't, you know, if we had moved to Brooks County for a year, that would have been easier to do, to have these ongoing relationships. But you got to keep up the relationships. It's not like you just establish a relationship and it's like there. You have to kind of, you know, keep it up.
I just want to see if there are any questions in the chat, which I don't see any. So, Bill, what is going on from your perspective in Brooks County, and what are you doing in your organization to help?
So our organization, the Human Rights Initiative North Texas, is 20 years old, and we provide free legal services for immigrants, asylum seekers, unaccompanied minors, mostly women escaping domestic violence, along with the social service needs of our clients. So we've been doing that for 20 years. That's what we're doing now. How that's really related to the border is that people do not leave their homes for frivolous reasons. They don't want to leave behind their family, their language, their culture, and travel dangerous routes. through the desert. They do that if they're really desperate. And so what we see in our office are very desperate people who are fleeing very desperate situations. And what has happened, this has always been the case, but what's happened, I'd say in the last year, have been a systematic steps that have made it more and more and more difficult for people to cross the border. Metering, which turned away people at the border, this disastrous policy of the migrant protection protocols, ironically named, which is remain in Mexico. So asylum seekers are forced to wait in these various dangerous border cities like Matamoros. And they're subject to, there's hundreds and hundreds of cases of rape and kidnapping and murder of people that just want to come to the United States and claim asylum. And then most recently, the administration through the Center for Disease Control issued a complete shutdown of the border. So no one is getting across. And those that do are being, and so they have this occasion with children that they were briefly putting them in hotels before they sent them back without ever seeing a judge, without seeing an asylum officer. They were sent back to danger. And the reason that's really awful, well, there's a lot of reasons, but one is it violates the principle of non-refoulement, which came out of the international response to the Holocaust, is that nations should not return people to their danger. And so what's happening, how that's tied to this excellent film, is the desperate people are going to come into the country. And if you don't have a mechanism for them to come and do that through applying at the border, or a refugee program that's not functioning at historic lows, they're going to come anyway. They're just going to do it in more and more dangerous ways. They're going to, stow away in overseas shipping containers. They're going to walk through that really dangerous brush country. And we just should recognize that people are going to do it, and we should have legal mechanisms to permit them to do it, so they're not left to these dangerous routes.
So we have about 1 minute left. And first I want to thank both Lisa and Jeffrey. Thank you so much for being with us and letting us show the film. But Bill, very quickly, what can we as people here in Texas or around the world do to help with this problem?
I can give you two very practical things. One, we have an action sign up where you go to bit.ly/HRI sign up to sign up for our actions in contacting legislator.